Hi, I'm Kara Pack, and this is my A Good Teacher Turns Bad case study for EDL 851. Category 1, Problem Identification and Data Analysis. Identifying the problem. This is a case study that involves Mrs. Horton. She is a former Teacher of the Year. She has been in the building a long time. She's always done a nice job in her profession. She's worked well with others, but there's been a noticeable change in her behavior after there have been some rumors of some trouble at home. She's become irritable. She's had several complaints from parents, from students, from fellow coworkers. And then Mrs. Wilson, the principal, has fielded these complaints, and specifically one from Mr. Stafford, whose daughter is in Mrs. Horton's class, and he's demanding that his daughter change placements immediately. So the principal set up a meeting between the two, and during the meeting, Mrs. Horton was very unprofessional, was yelling at Mr. Stafford. So Mrs. Wilson stopped the meeting, said, we'll reschedule, we'll have a plan of action for you as soon as possible. And so the problem is where is Mrs. Wilson going to go from here with Mrs. Horton and with Mr. Stafford to find a resolution to this problem? What do I know? I know that Mrs. Horton's behavior has changed. The troubles at home are just rumored. Nothing's been said by her specifically, but there's been a noticeable change in her behavior. I know that the principal, Mrs. Wilson, wants to be supportive and help Mrs. Horton out, and she doesn't want to make any rash decisions. She wants to think things through and try to be supportive for as long as she can. I also know that there have been multiple complaints about Mrs. Horton from almost everyone that she comes in contact with. And I also know that the initial meeting between Mr. Stafford and Mrs. Horton did not resolve the issue, and he still is demanding that his daughter be moved from that classroom. What do I still need to know? I need to know, it stated in the case study that Mrs. Wilson had done some observations and she didn't see anything alarming in them, but were these observations pre-planned or were they pop-in observations? Did Mrs. Horton know that Mrs. Wilson was coming during this amount of time, so was she able to collect herself and put on a good display for her? I also need to know, when was Mrs. Horton's last evaluation and what was the result? Were there areas of concern in it, or was she marked proficient in those areas? But then again, how long ago was that evaluation done? I also need to make sure that I'm current and I know what that specific district's evaluation process is and what all is involved. Looking at an evaluation, how often it's done, if there's a discrepancy, what happens, and then also if I want to put on a plan of improvement, what the steps are that are involved with that. And I also need to know, are there any resources available to Mrs. Horton that the district could provide, or could show her different resources to maybe help her deal with her emotional state? Category 2, plan of action with the strategies for implementation. So my plan of action would be, first, documentation. I need to gather all the documents of observations about the complaints, her evaluation, and any other important data I need to make sure that I have. I need to set up a meeting as soon as possible with Human Resources to discuss the potential of maybe putting Mrs. Horton on a plan of action and make sure that I fully understand what my responsibilities are, what her responsibilities are, and how to work through that plan with her. I need to set up a meeting with Mrs. Horton to discuss this whole situation, and I need to give her an opportunity to tell her side of the story, her perspective on things. I think it's important to listen to all parties who are involved. And then I need to work with Mrs. Horton to create this plan of action. Set a specific goal or objective that she can work on. Also set an appropriate time frame for these goals to be met, and how are we going to monitor them. Then I need to draft a letter to the parents and just, reiterate what our school's expectations are for staff behaviors, and also make sure that they understand the appropriate lines of communication, who they should talk to first, and then after that, if they have a concern, reassure them that they will be listened to, and I think it will just help strengthen that relationship between the school and community if we can just talk about the expectations again that we have. Category 3, resolve the issue to promote the success for all students. So by providing training for staff, I think we need to go over what staff expectations are, and also how to talk about how your personal life can affect your professional life. I think that will help ensure that everyone is on the same page, everyone understands what the expectations are. And if you can do that, then I think that will strengthen collaboration between teachers, which ultimately will help promote student success. I think by also providing Mrs. Horton just an opportunity to be reflective of her life and the situation and how things are playing out, and to provide that support for her so that she feels like she's not alone and that we're working through this, and this plan is to help her improve, that it's for her benefit. I think that ultimately will benefit all the stakeholders. And then also just making sure that we communicate with the community about what staff expectations are, open lines of communication that will just strengthen that relationship between us. Debriefing the problem. So as I was going through this case study, some things that I was thinking of, I thought, Mrs. Wilson really is trying to support Mrs. Horton, which I think is a strength of any administrator. They need to be able to provide that support for their staff. And I think that it also would be, important that to refresh the expectations on staff behaviors for the entire staff, and they need to be trained on that, and it needs to be something that you go over every year. And then I was also thinking, I wonder when her last evaluation was and what did it show. Some things that I was feeling, I was empathetic to what Mrs. Horton is going through. I mean, me personally, I went through a divorce, and you really do have to work to separate your personal and your professional lives. But I was also feeling frustration that Mrs. Wilson had been fielding these complaints from fellow staff members, but she really wasn't addressing it earlier. And now it's kind of gotten to this boiling over point where parents are getting involved. And that makes me sad for the students in the classroom that it's reached this point, because it doesn't sound like it's a very loving, nurturing environment that they're in right now, which makes me value just the power and the importance of building relationships within your building. I know it's something that I consider a strength of mine, is building relationships with other people. That way you can have these open conversations and they feel supported and they feel, valued, so that they can come to you and talk to you about their problems. And just the importance of the school community connection, because you never want to get to a point where parents are demanding that students be moved from one classroom to another. We want them to feel that every classroom is a safe, loving, nurturing environment for their student to learn and grow. And then the effectiveness of good PD, maybe doing some professional development on trauma-sensitive schools, and that even includes staff to talk about what they can do when they go through trauma, and then how to deal with that. Some unresolved issues. I would like to know, does Mrs. Horton still even want to teach? Is that the career path she still wants to go down? Does she still have that passion for it? There's still not a resolution to what are we going to do with Mr. Stafford's daughter? Where is she going to go? And will the improvement plan even work? Reflecting on standard 2, as far as the instructional capacity goes, I think getting Mrs. Horton on an improvement plan with support will help her focus on instructing the students, which they will benefit from. And then monitoring the effectiveness of that plan will ensure that an environment is conducive to learning. And making changes along the way. If it's not working, when you're progress monitoring, if it's not working, it shows that we're always going to do what's best for students at all times, because ultimately that's the bottom line. When it comes to the personal well-being, providing training to staff and an opportunity for them to realize how their personal lives have the potential to affect their professional lives is huge. Communicating to families, it can strengthen that school and community relationship. And then just overall, it will improve the culture and the feel of the building and in the classrooms, which is essential to a student's academic and social growth. And then when it comes to the school leader, I think it's important that you are always making decisions based on what is best for students, and that should always be on your mind at all times. Implementing school-wide professional development will increase the instructional capacity for academic and social growth, and then constantly monitoring improvement plans and making changes if necessary is essential. You have to show that you're never settling, you're never becoming complacent, you're always looking for rooms for improvement, because ultimately it's the students who will benefit from that. Thank you very much.